AM 950 Radio. Dr. Sinacropi is out again today, so you've just got me, his co-host, Mandi Dickey, nurse practitioner, as he's esteemed nurse practitioner all the time. I wanted to, every week we come on here, and our goal is to bring you something new to think about to be the CEO of your own health. And last week we got really fired up about how misinformation gets spread in healthcare as well as in society. And I thought I'd kind of play off that a little bit today, this week, to talk about some myths when it comes to health and wellness. So some things that have come up either in social media or in just conversation with my family at home, things that people question that you might hear one way and then the next day or month, whatever, you hear something completely different. So some of the things I want to talk about today are the balance between exercise and diet and kind of what that looks like. The possibility of getting too much of a good thing. Is it possible to do too much of a good thing, whether it's medications or treatment, exercise, food, whatever it may be? We're going to break down some of those things. And then, are carbs really the devil? Like, we hear about it all the time in different news shows, different reportings that need to go away from carbs, and that's going to be the answer to all your problems. Is it really going to be the answer to all your problems? So we'll cover that today. And then even just one thing that I've heard about in my home with the kids, does cracking your knuckles actually cause arthritis? So a little bit on a different topic than the rest of it, but a good thing to cover anyway, because again, we hear all of these things, and are they really true or not? That's one of the big things that we talk about here on this show all the time, is vetting out that information. We're trying to help you guys figure out what is real information versus what's something that you don't necessarily need to listen to. And being in healthcare for 25 years, I can say that I've heard all sorts of questions from patients as they've come in. And they say, well, is this really a bad thing for me? Or should I be doing this? Again, whether it's nutrition or medications. We watch the TV and they have all the commercials on that say, ask your healthcare provider if this medication is good for you, right? Well, maybe it's not really something that you should be taking, but you hear about it and you're like, well, maybe, should I? And then when it comes to food, we hear so many different things. And we've talked about that a little bit on the show. And as we talked about last week, we're going to try to have an episode just on some of those big popular diets and what's the pros and cons of them. So that's up and coming in future episodes. But I'll get a little taste of some of those answers in here today. So to start off, before we get to the break, I'll give you a little teaser on this one. So like I said, the first one I wanted to talk about is the balance between exercise and diet. And what do I mean by that balance? For years, we were taught in our medical education, nursing education, that we needed to teach our patients that in order to lose weight, you had to move more and eat less. And that was the equation that we were always taught. That was going to be the golden answer: move more, eat less. Well, if you've tried that, it probably hasn't worked for you, because it's not really true. It's not an exact equation. You can't really say just moving more and eating less is going to be the answer. And it's probably not going to make a huge difference on the scale for you. My big thing with that is that not all calories are created equal. And we'll talk about that actually a lot in the different subjects that we talk about today. So not all calories are created equal. Not all exercise is created equal. And there is such a thing as moving too much, which we'll also talk about today, just that too much idea. And there is such a thing as eating different things of too much. I mean, we always hear about people eating too much, but is it too much of one thing? Is it too much of everything? You can actually overdo it on pretty much anything. So we will get into all of these topics and more on the other side of the break here on AM 950 Radio. Back from the break. We're back on AM 950 Radio with Recharging the Human Battery. And like I said before the break, today we're going to talk about a lot of those different myths of health and nutrition and exercise, diet, all those different topics, as well as the knuckle cracking, because that was a fun one to talk about with my kids this week. So again, that balance between exercise and diet. Not all calories are created equal. And I have a little story to tell you on this because 20 some years ago, whatever, when I started actually paying attention to what I was eating and counting calories, I would get to the end of the day and start looking at my calories. And if I hadn't reached my calorie goal, I would start to eat whatever I wanted to do to get those calories in. And it was usually a little scoop or a little dish of ice cream, which ice cream is high in sugar and high in just empty calories. So what do I mean by empty calories? Empty calories are any calories that do nothing for your body metabolically. So it's largely junk food, things that come prepackaged, those things that can live on shelves for months, like we talked about last week, like the Twinkie that was still alive in Wally, lives on the shelf for months, years, decades even. Is that something we really should be putting inside of our bodies? So those empty calories, that junk food type of things, those are our potato chips, our snack bars, even things that are portrayed as healthy snack bars, healthy granola bars. Many of those have things in them, ingredients that we really shouldn't be ingesting on a regular basis. Also includes things like pretzels, cookie, candy, most crackers, and I could go on and on that list of empty calories. Many years ago, I guess probably just several years ago, I read a book called Eat Fat, Get Thin, and it talked about all of the misinformation regarding nutrition that we get in this world. And it was quite an eye-opening read because it went through all the things, like I'm doing today, all the myths that we've heard about in nutrition and diet world, and really debunked all of them on a scientific level as to why different foods are good for our bodies and why others are not, specifically fats in our diet. So one example they showed was a study that was done, just a simple study with kids where 2 plates of snacks were put out for the kids while they were doing their activities. 1 plate of potato chips, 1 plate of cheese cubes. The children were not limited on how much they could eat. It was unlimited. They just wanted to do this observational study and look and see what happened when they were given no limits and had these 2 options to choose from. The children that went back to the potato chip plate went back again and again, basically because the chips were not meeting any of their nutritional needs. So it was just something to do. Whereas the kids that went to the plate of cheese cubes, they ate until they were satisfied, and then they took no more. They self-restrained. The cheese met their needs, they didn't overeat, and even though nobody was regulating them, they still just ate what they needed because, the cheese met their needs. It satisfied their hunger, and they stopped and continued playing. So that simple study showed multiple things. It showed, 1, the importance of healthy fats in satisfying our cravings. So that was a big thing in this book, was identifying that healthy fats actually help curb our cravings. They help curb our appetite. They keep us from overeating. And then also, too, it showed that we tend to have a lack of restraint when it comes to junk food. So we just kind of keep blindly eating because our dietary needs have not been met. Those potato chips, for example, they're going in your body, but they're not matching any one of those nutritional components that our body expects to get. So we keep eating because we keep expecting to meet that need and we still haven't met it. So my point with that is that in order to truly see a difference in your weight loss, you need to be mindful of the foods that you're eating and the type of exercise that you're participating in, because it's not going to be just move more and eat less. That's not going to be the equation, because as I just kind of showed, not all calories are created equal, and not all exercise is created equal. So this kind of leads me into the next one just a little bit here. So somewhere along the way, I heard that it was just the first bite of something sweet that you needed to eat, and then you could stop, because really that first bite was all you needed to kind of feed that craving. And this kind of goes up to that whole study with the cheese and potato chips, right? But that one first bite doesn't actually do anything for you. And that's all well and good to say that, but we tend not to stop, because while it's true that first bite is usually the most pleasurable, when you are craving something sweet, you get that first bite and you're like, oh, that really tastes good. But what it does is actually increases a hormone in your body called ghrelin, which actually stimulates your appetite and increases your cravings. So while you think that that first bite is going to be the kind of all you need to meet that craving, it's actually going to tell you that you want more of that. So you're going to want more, you're going to want to eat more, you're going to take more bites because that hormone has told you that you still have that craving, and now you have that craving even more. So when we're looking again, based on the cubes of cheese versus the potato chips, you're going to keep eating those potato chips because now your ghrelin is stimulated and your appetite for those chips has stimulated. So it actually does the opposite of what we anticipate it's going to do. On a related topic then, again, potato chips are carbs. So let's move into our carb discussion, which is probably going to take most of my day today. So are carbs really the devil? Over the years, we've seen a lot of change in nutrition recommendations. A fair number of fad diets have come across the market. And let me take a moment there to just say, first off, what is a fad diet? We hear this term, but do we all really know what that means? A fad diet is any diet that's popular at the time. It claims to produce weight loss, and it may or may not be based on scientific evidence. But even with these fad diets, if you do tend to lose weight, as soon as you go off the diet, you're going to get that weight coming back typically and then some. So it's not that you can take it off and keep it off. It comes, if you're not following that diet plan forever, that weight is going to come right back on, because most people don't then relearn how to get back into healthy eating after they get off that fad diet. So some examples of fad diets that we've heard of over the years, things like the Atkins diet, even keto, grapefruit diet, which I never did try that one, thank goodness, intermittent fasting. Paleo diet technically is considered a fad diet as well. Any of the low-fat diets, any cleanses, various shake diets that have come across the market. And there are a lot more that I've never even heard of. I've had some patients come into my office and they talk about some particular diet, and I have to look it up myself because I've not heard of it before. And again, while some of these diets have more research-based findings behind them than others, when they're used as a diet, they tend to have that huge rebound effect. So when we think about them, we also have to think about what they can do for our bodies, even if it's not a bad thing. But there are some bad things that can happen with some of these fad diets. So some of them can actually be dangerous in the long term. So Atkins diet was huge. Back, I think probably back in the early 2000s, I was still hearing about it quite a bit. There's a high amount of protein in the Atkins diet. It's meat upon meat. So as I like to joke about it, it's protein with a side of protein. But it can be problematic for people who have kidney issues because our kidneys have to break down protein in order to get it out of our body. When we do that on a regular basis and we're constantly having high amounts of protein in our diet and not really much anything else, it puts a lot of stress on your kidneys. So somebody that has fragile kidneys, they have diabetes, they have other kidney disease, for example, and they go on an Atkins diet or something like the Atkins diet, that's going to put more stress on their kidneys that can cause problems in the long term. Keto diet, that's something that I'm actually following right now, but keto diet, if followed strictly, can lead to thyroid issues, especially in women. So it's really important when women start looking at keto diet, looking at cycling it or taking breaks from it every once in a while, because you do need some of those carbs to come back in just to keep your thyroid healthy. Any of the shake diets that are out there, and I've fallen victim to those along the years as well. Any of the shake diets may produce weight loss, but again, once you get off of them and start eating real food, then that weight usually comes back, like I said, and then some, because most of us don't take the time to get fully educated on how to properly transition from those shake diets back to regular food. And that's where that problem comes in, because if you just go cold turkey on the shake diet and you go back to food, you're typically going to go back into your old habits, for one. But you're not going to know when it's appropriate to eat different foods throughout the day. Many of these diets have one big thing in common. They have low carbs, or they have a complete lack of carbs completely in them. Carbs in general are not the devil. And yes, I'm going to say that again. Carbs in general are not the devil. Our brains need carbs. Glucose is actually the preferred energy source for our brain, and we get glucose into our body in the form of carbohydrates that break down into that glucose. So our brain cells actually require twice as much energy as the rest of the cells in your body. Twice as much. So if you cut down your carbs completely out of your diet, you're not going to be feeding your brain. There's some research to say that on keto diet specifically, those ketones can help to serve the purpose of glucose in the brain, but I don't know how effectively it does it if it does it just the same as glucose. So you do need that glucose in your body. What you don't need is plain old sugar. So not all carbs are created equal. Like we talked about, not all foods, not all exercise, not all carbs are created equal either. Carbohydrates that have a high glycemic index, those are the things that are made with refined sugars and flours. Those cause spikes in our blood sugar, and they actually starve the brain of energy. So when you get that spike in the blood sugar, you get that crash afterwards, and your brain is not getting the energy that it needs. Complex carbohydrates, things like whole wheat, barley, and rye, those, when they're part of a healthy diet and taken especially with a healthy fat in them, can fuel your body and actually give you the proper energy source for your brain to run effectively. So you've heard things like avocado toast. That's where this comes in, because you've got your sprouted grain, healthy grain bread with an avocado smashed on top. You got your complex carbs and your healthy fats together. It's really impressive fuel for your body. It's tasty if you've never, but you're getting those basic needs met. So unlike that pile of potato chips, that avocado toast is actually going to feed your brain, it's going to feed your body, and you're going to feel satisfied and you're not going to overeat with it. So cutting carbs is not always going to be the answer. However, I'm going to give a big caveat here, because the way we have produced our carbs in the United States, there's a lot of processing involved. We have mass-produced our foods, including our wheat, to the point where it can actually now cause inflammation. For the past several years, I would say people have asked, why does it seem like there seem to be more people with gluten intolerance in this world now? Why do we seem to have more issues with that? And it's not just that people are following this fad diet, because some of them are. There are some people that do the gluten-free because they think it's healthier for them, not because they have to, but there are more people that have to stick away from gluten these days because of the way that we've processed our foods. So, which kind of makes me wonder sometimes what is a gluten? So if the people don't know what gluten is, what is it? Why is it the devil? Is it actually the devil? Maybe that's worse than carbs. Gluten itself is a protein that's found in grains like wheat, barley, and rye. And if you remember a couple minutes ago, I just said those were the healthy complex carbohydrates that we need. So if they're healthy, how can they be a problem? But again, it gets down to how we process those products. So gluten itself is a binder in things like bread and pasta. That's where we get the things like the wheat, barley, and the rye. The wheat that we produce here in the United States is so high in gluten that there are actually claims that someone who's gluten intolerant in the United States could potentially go to places like Europe and other countries and eat bread without any issues. So how can that be if they're gluten intolerant? It's because, again, of how we produce the wheat and how we produce that gluten. The high rate of gluten in our foods, with that high rate of gluten, we all have some level of gluten intolerance in our lifetimes. It just depends on where we're going to hit that threshold for having too much in our system. And they talked about that in that book that I read also, the Eat Fat, Get Thin book. Talked about how it can happen anywhere between ages 2 to 100 plus. Anywhere in there, you can hit that threshold where your body can take no more gluten, and now it's causing inflammation. So yes, it might be the case that you could have eaten gluten all your life, and now you can't at whatever age that you are, because it starts causing inflammation, it starts causing problems in your body, and it's no longer the good, healthy, complex carbohydrate that it's supposed to be. Now it's causing issues, and it's causing health problems for you. So if you're like me and you found out in adulthood that you can't do gluten anymore, things like the paleo diet don't seem to be so much of a fad diet anymore. It's a way of life, because you're finding healthier alternatives for those complex carbs that your body needs, but you're getting them in more natural sources, things that don't have that high gluten content anymore. So that said, The next thing I wanted to talk about is that idea of too much of a good thing, because that kind of builds off of that whole carb thought as well. Can you have too much of a good thing? Yes. And this pertains to anything that we do in our lives. It's with our diet, with our exercise, with our therapies that we do. Any kind of thing that we can do too much. At the beginning of the show, I talked about how whether people just need to eat less and move more. So moving more does not always have the answer that we need. Moving too much can actually cause problems. Some examples of that. So people who are training for running events can advance their running too quickly. They can advance too quickly in distance. They can advance too quickly in speed. Either one of these can lead to musculoskeletal injuries. And along that lines, people who jump into some high-intensity workouts can also do so too quickly. They can push themselves too hard and have what's called a medical crisis called rhabdomyolysis, or we call it rhabdo for short. The muscles break down and excess proteins and electrolytes are released into the bloodstream. Those need to be filtered out by our kidneys. And if you remember, as I was talking about protein issues before, too much protein in the blood system can cause problems with our kidneys because our kidneys have to filter that out. It can actually cause severe kidney damage. It leads people to be in intensive care unit for a while or hospitalized because we have to rebalance the proteins and electrolytes in their system so that we don't have permanent damage. And then it's a question of, can you actually drink too much water? So there's another one. Though most of us are not anywhere near that threshold because most of us do not get enough water in our day, it is potentially possible to drink too much water. If you consistently drink more than is recommended for your body weight, again, your kidneys can't keep up. They can't filter out that excess water. So what's the proper amount of water to drink in your day? Take your body weight in pounds and divide that by 2. That's the number of ounces of water you should drink in a day. So for a 100-pound person, you should be drinking 50 ounces of water in a day. And think about how big your water bottle is. Multiply that enough to get that water in a day. We used to say, too, that if you're drinking enough water, your urine should be clear. That's a really good response, too. But if you're drinking too much water, it's always going to be clear. So when we're looking at that too much water, what happens in our body? What happens at the cellular level? When you get too much water in your body, it's actually going to dilute your blood. So all of those electrolytes that we talk about, they have to be in perfect balance in order for your body to run appropriately. Sodium is a big one there because water and sodium are really closely connected. When we have too much water and it's diluting the sodium in our blood, it leads to something called hyponatremia. Hypo just meaning too low amount of sodium. When we're looking at that too low of sodium in your blood, in medicine and as we're going through school, we always learn that water follows sodium. So if the sodium level is higher in your cells than it is in your blood, water is actually going to rush into your cells to follow that sodium, which can lead to swelling of the tissues. So you get swelling all over your body. That might be more of a nuisance thing for you visually, but what it's doing is creating extra work on your kidneys to try to rebalance those electrolytes again. And while all of that is happening, that low sodium level in your blood is sending a signal to your brain that you need more water. So you actually get more thirsty and you try to drink more water. And this can lead to a very dangerous, actually life-threatening condition when people drink too much water and they then get in this cycle where they're still thirsty, so they're drinking too much more and their sodium level drops, and that can cause brain damage. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. And do most of us run the risk of drinking too much water on a regular basis? No. Most of us are nowhere near the water that we should be drinking. So we're more at risk of dehydration than we are of overhydration, but it is still possible. Outside of those typical things, as I've been trying to recover from my brain injury, for example, I've been doing all of the speech therapy, occupational therapy, and there came a point where my neurologist and I were talking about whether or not I was overdoing it, because it is possible to overdo therapy, and then you need to take a break from that kind of treatment in order to actually get better. Because if you're overworking yourself, you're putting too much stress on your body, that can actually decrease your healing and slow things down. The same kind of thought behind that is behind my next part of this overdoing it world. And outside of the typical things where we talk about food, diet, exercise, whatever, as Dr. Cinecropy and I have been moving into the world of complementary therapies, we also need to be cautious not to overdo it with our clients in clinic. Because as I'm working at Hypercharge, I often get asked about why don't we put people in those energy beds for longer periods of time than we do? Some of the beds we do 8 minutes at a time, because if we do more than that, it's actually problematic. It's too much for your body. Why can't we do laser therapy for longer periods of time? We typically keep it to 15 minutes or less with a session. I had one client actually who got really upset with me because he wanted to use all of the modalities multiple times a day, and he thought there was nothing wrong with that. So we had to have a really good conversation about it, because like the things that I just explained with the diet, exercise, and the water, things like that, you can get too much red light energy in your body, and you can get too much laser. So with these, like anything else we can do, you can underdose and you can overdose. So overdose, when we talk about that, it's not like overdosing on a medication, which can lead to death, but it can lead to damage in your body, and it can lead to decreased healing times. So overdosing on red light, whether it is in an energy bed or through a class 4 laser, either one of those can lead to diminished results, can prolong your healing rather than speeding it up. Class 4 laser, same thing. If you use it for too much of it or for too long, tissue damage can occur, which is the exact opposite of the goal of why we're doing it. People seek class 4 laser treatment in order to help themselves heal faster. So if you're getting too much of it and it's slowing down your progress, you're doing the exact opposite of what you wanted to do and why you went there to begin with. So it's finding that balance. There's that fine line of too much and too little. And as I'm working with people in clinic and we're trying to find that sweet spot, once we get to that, that's where we stick. So we don't want to underdose. So we don't want to do too little, but we don't want to overdose because that's going to slow down the healing also. So finding that sweet spot in any of these conditions, whether it's your exercise or your therapy, your diet, your water, whatever that is, there's a sweet spot for every person. And it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of answer to say that this person A, person B, you need the exact same treatment, because it's not going to be the case. Everybody's going to be slightly different. That's why we individualize everything in medicine and in life. Everything needs to be individualized so that you get the right amount for your body. So the last one that I really wanted to talk about for sure here is this idea of knuckle cracking. So completely off the topic of the rest of them, but I thought it was just a fun one to cover today anyway. It can be a little controversial, maybe just annoying for people when you're sitting somewhere and you hear somebody do that huge knuckle crack. Sometimes it makes people cringe, and sometimes I hear people saying, "Oh, that sounds like it felt so good." But we were all told as kids, if we got into that habit of cracking our knuckles, that we were probably all told that we needed to stop doing it or it was going to lead to arthritis. One of my kids asked me this recently, so that's why I brought this on. And she was honestly asking, so she wanted to know, and I had to go to the research because I honestly didn't know the answer to this one. Thankfully, Harvard Health actually had posted an article back in 2020 that actually addressed this exact question. So contrary to popular belief, they reported that cracking your knuckles, while it can be really annoying to everybody around us, it doesn't actually increase the risk of us developing arthritis. Now, that said, if somebody has osteoarthritis, cracking your knuckles can actually increase the speed of damage. So can it cause some problems? Yes. Is it going to cause problems in everybody? Probably not. And the other caveat that they gave with that is that if you experience pain when you're trying to crack your knuckles, it is advised to try to quit, because that's likely a sign that there's something wrong in your joints, something that you need to address. Because if you continue doing that, that can lead to damage in your knuckles. So bottom line with any of this is that you need to listen to your body. Often when people are overdoing things, they're not listening to the warning signs that their body is trying to give. If you are, I'll go back up to the beginning, if you are exercising too much and you're not listening to your body. First off, when you start an exercise program, typically there's going to be some pain involved because you're doing something, you're using muscles that haven't been used in who knows how long. So you're going to have some pain in that, but you have to look at the level of pain and the type of pain. If it's pain that's getting worse every time you work out, or it's lasting a whole lot longer than it should, that's something that you need to consider. Is this something that is too intense for you at this time? It doesn't mean that you can't do that kind of exercise. It just is maybe giving you the signal that you might be getting into it too quickly. You might be pushing yourself too hard. As with somebody who is training for a running event, like I said, you can get into it and go too far, too fast. And the big thing is monitoring your body. When you feel those little aches and pains, try to figure out what's going on. Is this just a muscle ache from using that muscle that I haven't used before? Or is this something that I need to be more concerned about? With your diet, for years, I have recommended to people to take note of what they do and keep a diary of your diet. Talk about in that diet diary, what have you been eating? How does it make you feel? So if you start to notice patterns, you can start to identify, is there a certain food that's causing me problems? Another way to do this, kind of along the line, it's along the line of the fad diet, but it's not really a fad diet. It's more of the opposite of the fad diet. There's something called an autoimmune paleo diet. And that is specifically to find things that are causing inflammation in your body. So for a certain period of time, 30 days, this is not a never-ending thing. This is not a diet that you would follow for long periods of time. It's not even a diet that you would follow for weight loss. It's a diet to find out what's causing inflammation in your body. So this autoimmune paleo diet, you take away the foods for 30 days that would cause inflammation. There's a host of foods included in that. Nightshade vegetables, that includes tomatoes, peppers, things like that. Eggplants, which I'm not usually a big fan of anyway, so I was never a problem taking that one out. But beans, legumes, even dairy, anything that can cause inflammation in your body, you're taking it away for 30 days. And then you're going to slowly bring things back once your symptoms have gotten better to see what's causing problems and what's not. Again, this is a very individualized thing. This is for you to figure out what kind of foods work well with my body and what kind of foods don't. You could go to a naturopath or a functional medicine clinic and have lots of expensive testing done to figure out what kind of foods might be good for your body, but this is a really inexpensive way because you're taking foods away and you're doing this on your own terms. And then you, again, like I said, you slowly bring them back to the point where you can figure out what foods are good for me and what foods are going to cause harm or pain because you're listening to your body. So again, the big thing with that is listening to your body. I will say that again really slowly for you. Listen to your body because we don't do that on a regular basis. We're all pushing ourselves to our limits and then we brag about it and then we hurt and then we can't figure out why. Well, it's because we're eating things that aren't good for us. We're pushing ourselves to the limit. We might be exercising too much and probably not sleeping enough. That's one thing I didn't really talk about today was sleep. And that's not something that most of us overdo either. There are cases. So people who tend to have more mental health issues, if they're suffering from depression, severe anxiety, they might sleep more than they should. But that's not something that's going to go on for long periods of time. Most of us are underdosing on our sleep. We're not getting enough. And then, again, we tend to brag about the fact that, hey, I can run on 3 to 4 hours of sleep at night. Well, sure, you can maybe do that now, but that's not going to be a long-term thing for you. And when we get back to some of these topics that we covered today on diet and weight loss, and if we're trying to lose weight, even if somebody eats less and moves more, if you're not sleeping well, you're still not going to lose weight. So it's still going to be a problem. You have to have all of these things in balance. So we have checks and balances with all of these. In medicine, we can do lab tests. We can check and see where your electrolytes are, where your cholesterol is, all these different things, and look at lab tests that way. But you need to do those tests in your own body without the lab tests. So see how you feel with different exercise. See how you feel with different food. See how you feel with different levels of sleep at night. If you're not getting good sleep, it's going to affect the rest of your day. So getting back to a little bit some of these controversial topics, when we talk later on in future episodes about the different diets. We're going to take a deeper dive into them and see what are some of the pros and cons. I kind of touched on some of them today. What are the pros and cons of some of these? There are a lot that are considered fad diets that might not be as much faddish as they are, but they might become more of a lifestyle, like I mentioned with the paleo diet, for example. You can talk about it as a fad diet. Yes, can people lose weight on paleo diet? Absolutely. The first time I went on it in 6 months, I lost like 40 pounds because I lost a lot of inflammation in my body. And that's the big thing with that. So it's not necessarily so much just the fact that I lost weight, but it was what kind of weight that I lost and how much healthier I felt afterwards because I had taken away all the things that caused inflammation in my diet. And again, that was a big learning point for me, trying to figure out how to listen to my body better, because working in healthcare, we tend to be a little bit more type A than other people, and we tend to be the overdoers of the world and push ourselves to the limits. We don't sleep because we're taking care of other people. We eat when we can. It's not always the best choices, but over the years as a practitioner, I have tried to do as much as I can to practice what I preach. So when I'm telling you about these diet things, it's the same things that I've followed myself. When I tell you about these exercise things, it's again the same things that I've tried to do myself. The sleep is one area where up until the last probably year or two, I really didn't focus on it either. I will admit to that one. But it's huge the difference that can be made when you get enough sleep. And so I guess that one can kind of be considered a myth, because some people think that they can do that 3 to 4 hours of sleep at night and they're just fine. There are a lot of different calculators out there. You can go online and look at the different statistics on who should get sleep. And the younger you are, the more sleep you typically need. It's almost like a bell curve, though. Kind of in the middle, people need less sleep, but then we need more sleep again as we get older, but it's a different time frame. So think about the early bird specials at the restaurant, right? The older patients or older population are going there and eating dinner at 4 o'clock at night because they're going to bed at 5. Our sleep needs change over our lives. Our dietary needs change over our lives. The big thing, again, is just listening to your body, following those signs, finding that balance for you, and finding what works. Because it's not a one-size-fits-all with any of the myths that I talked about today. So that said, when we come back from the break, I'll kind of wrap up my thoughts on this, and we'll wrap up the show for today. I hope you found something enjoyable and found something that you can take with you to be useful for today. But other than that, we'll wrap up after the break. And welcome back from the break for Recharging the Human Battery on AM 950 Radio. I got stuck on my thoughts right before break, and I was trying to come up with the next thought I wanted to have, and I had so many thoughts swirling that it took me a moment to catch my words. So I apologize for that abrupt ending before the break, but I wanted to just go quickly through a few more things, because as I was wrapping up, I kept thinking about all the other different myths that come up in healthcare and just health and wellness to begin with. And you can do any kind of Google search and find all sorts of myths out there. I just wanted to talk about just a few that kind of I thought about at the last minute. One kind of related to the conversations I was having earlier, that the first one being that eggs are bad for you. And this one kind of makes me laugh all the time, because we've gone through so many different changes. I mentioned earlier that there's been so many different changes in nutrition recommendations over the years. For a while, they were saying only eat the egg whites, don't eat the egg yolks. And the egg whites actually have more inflammatory properties for some people than the yolks do. But that myth has been debunked, but it's really hard to really kind of get it out into the mainstream that eggs are not bad for you. You can actually eat quite a few eggs. And in that same book that I talked about earlier, the Eat Fat, Get Thin, they talked about how they actually evaluated cholesterol levels of people who ate eggs and people who didn't eat eggs. And people who ate eggs actually had healthier cholesterol readings than those who didn't, because it's a healthy fat, it's a healthy food for you, it's a healthy protein source that helps to reduce your cholesterol readings. Cholesterol by itself is a reading of inflammation in your body. So if you're eating any kind of foods that cause inflammation, that's going to cause problems. So I guess that's even a better one that I should have covered, is the whether or not the cholesterol is actually a really good reading for you. Things that are prepackaged, things that are processed, like the junk foods that I talked about earlier, those are going to cause more problems with your cholesterol readings than the eggs or the bacon that you might eat, because those have healthy fats, those have healthy protein properties, that those are actually, the eggs and bacon are actually going to decrease your cholesterol, whereas the prepackaged processed foods are going to increase it, because those are things that are causing inflammation in your body. And that I probably could have done a show on just by itself, honestly, because for years as a stroke provider, cholesterol was always a big thing on my mind. Some of the other ones that kind of make me giggle a little bit, cranberry juice curing UTIs. Research has identified over and over again now that if you drink cranberry juice on a regular basis, it can help prevent them, but it's not going to treat them. The joke that we've sometimes said is that, sure, you can drink cranberry juice to try to treat your UTI and it'll get rid of it in 7 days, or you take an antibiotic and it goes away in a week. A week and 7 days are both the same thing. So it's not going to have the same effects necessarily. The timely one for this one, the flu vaccine doesn't do anything for you. So the flu vaccine itself, the influenza, since it's been around, has morphed and changed as it's gone through the populations, because we've all built up different immune systems and certain strains no longer cause effect on us. But every year it seems there's a new strain coming out, and the flu vaccine is based on the last strain. So we may or may not be catching that correct strain, but what it will do is decrease your risk of actually getting the illness if you get exposed to the influenza virus. So you might not get as sick as you would have if you hadn't had the flu vaccine. So while it might not seem to stop it completely, it doesn't eradicate it, but what it will do is prevent you from getting as sick as you could have gotten. It's the same thing with the shingles vaccine. It's going to keep you from getting as sick as you could have gotten had you not gotten it. Along that line, so the number one way to prevent the spread of illness is to wash our hands. And how have we all been taught to wash our hands over the years? You need to get them really soapy, and there's a myth out there that you have to wash your hands in hot water for it to be effective. When actually it's been proven it's more of the friction that causes the change than anything. So as long as you have that friction and you create the bubbles all over your hands with your soaps, and I argue with my kids on this all the time because my 11-year-old never wants to actually wash his hands. He'll put the soap on his hands and put his hands immediately under the water and rinse the soap off. That's not washing your hands. Wash your hands and create that friction. That's where you're going to get rid of any viruses or bacteria that are sitting on your hands. And that's what's going to help you prevent the spread of disease. Number one way to spread disease. You've seen the signs all over the place. We were taught that in medical school, nursing school, and it's the same thing. Washing your hands is the number one way to prevent the spread of infection. And the last thing that I'll kind of get in here really quickly is the myth that young people don't have heart attacks or strokes. Because of the way we've changed our diet, because of the way we've changed our exercise and our societal needs and needing to sit down more and not be as active as we used to be back in the day, we are seeing people having strokes and heart attacks at younger and younger ages, because those risk factors, those things that put you at risk, the high cholesterol, the diabetes, the heart disease, all those things that we used to see just in older people, we're seeing in younger and younger because of our lifestyles. So this all gets back to that whole lifestyle conversation that we've had on every episode of this show pretty much, when we talk about how your lifestyle is up to you. That's your choice. Your family may have passed down habits, but it's up to you now to make those decisions on how to move forward in a healthy manner. So choose a lifestyle that's going to get you where you want. Be the CEO of your own healthcare. Educate yourself. Look at these myths. Try to see if you have any other ones that you want us to answer in future episodes. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of your family, and be well.